Thank you so much. Inspiration can come from different quarters. And I do hope today you are as inspired as I am, just listening to the fantastic and very enriching talks from the different panel members. But I'd also love to share a story about inspiration on my work, which I say it can come from very unexpected quarters. A country called Niger in West Africa, in the Sahel. I was in charge of a program that was called Regreening Africa program. This program, like any other program, we had designed it without a lot of knowledge of the local context that we were going to operate in. It was a program that was supposed to be implemented across 8 countries in Africa. Definitely one of the biggest initiatives I had taken up. And as we tried to work with the partners, our local partners, to figure out what we were going to do across all these 8 countries, I landed in the country of Niger for the first time in my life. I don't speak French. If you're in this room, you know Nigerians, French, and local languages. But above all, it was my initial imagination of Niger as a country, a Sahelian country, that I had learned a lot about the Sahelian ecology. It's arid and semi-arid. And I had been told when you go there, you keep sipping water, you keep drinking water because the temperatures can get to 45 degrees Celsius, 46 degrees Celsius. And so you have to keep hydrating and hydrating. And so I had my own misconceptions of what I was going to expect in Niger, until I got to the place that has completely changed the way I look at landscapes. And that was an area that is well-researched. You can find a lot of literature, YouTube videos about Zinda and Maradi regions. These areas used to be extremely degraded, bare almost, about 2 decades ago. But the communities in Niger have completely turned that landscape into green landscapes without planting a single tree. And so I had a lot of learning with our partners. And so I was interested in knowing what drove that kind of a regraining. You're looking for fake pictures. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to put the photos of Niger. I promise you next time I'll have them. But I hope I can paint the story of Niger and get it in your minds, that the place was completely regreened without planting a single tree. And there was this fantastic method that the farmers were using called farmer-managed natural regeneration. And this method is based on indigenous knowledge, and the trees that are regenerated are the indigenous trees. And there were so many benefits that we sat down with the farmers, women, and youth telling us about the benefits of getting the landscapes green, including biodiversity, the tree species. Because we work from a research organization, we did a lot of studies. Again, Regreening Africa, if you type Regreening Africa on Google, you can be able to see the reports. We are comparing the diversity of tree species under regenerative farmer-managed natural regeneration and where we were having farmers plant trees. Completely different pictures in terms of tree species abundance, that's the number of trees that you're getting in particular places, as well as the species diversity. And the story does not end there. The benefits that were accruing to the communities, to women in terms of different economic benefits, the shea butter, I think a lot of us women here, when we go to the cosmetics, we are looking for something that is natural. And you know, shea butter, it comes from a tree that I also learned how women use it. They get the nut and they process it and they make the butter. And unfortunately, the price that we pay here is not the price that gets to the women in Niger. But it's still a very inspiring story of how we can use natural resources. So when I was asked to prepare this presentation about the role of biodiversity, agriculture, biodiversity, and in Africa, I tried an intellectual one, and now I'm regretting, but I'll still take you through my attempt to the intellectual journey. So I tried to think about the different areas and different scapes that you can have in terms of how you regenerate land, whether it's agricultural lands like the areas in Niger, and the relationship with biodiversity. And so I came up with those 3 levels. The soil health dimension. And that soil health dimension basically is the amount of biodiversity that you can get back into the soil. What goes into the soil affects the soil. What you take out of the soil also affects the soil. and then the farming practices that farmers use, and lastly, the landscape level. And so this diagram you're seeing here, I try to look at what you get when you have regenerative or agroecological farming methods versus when you have conventional methods on farming and in terms of soil health. So again, I work a lot with scientists. I'm a scientist myself. I work with teams of researchers, and we are trying to understand these dynamics. And when you look at regenerative methods, for instance, in Africa, we are seeing a lot of benefits in terms of, for instance, the amount of soil organic carbon that you get when you put biomass back into it, into the soil. And this is not just through, we imagine, for instance, the use of compost or manure. That's just one of them. There are also fantastic ways of fixing nitrogen through leguminous trees, through leguminous crops. And for instance, there's, again, another interesting case, I just don't have a lot of time to delve here, of a tree that is called Fiderbia albida. It's an acacia species, extremely efficient in fixing nitrogen into the soil. And again, with a lot of literature, with a lot of evidence that has gone into it to demonstrate increase in yields in areas where this tree has been without a single input of chemical and nitrogen into the soil. And of course, what I talked about, the biomass, you have the phosphorus. A lot of times, phosphorus is actually a very difficult nutrient to get into the soil because we mine it, and then once it gets the food that we consume, goes into the waste system, very difficult to bring it back. You cannot fix it biologically like nitrogen. But if you have efficient recycling systems, you can get it. And also the other methods, innovations that are coming up, including use of rock phosphates and other methods of increasing phosphorus. And the last one is, of course, the ability for the micronutrients. When you create that kind of an environment, you get a lot of microorganisms that are continuously decomposing. Think if you've worked, again, with the soils, healthy soils, I'm sure people who've worked with them, you put your hand in it, you'll see a lot of biodiversity, a lot of worms, a healthy ecosystem. On the other hand, the conventional farming methods, what we are seeing and where we are hitting a challenge in terms of productivity is the more you input chemical fertilizer, and especially when you have a lot of excessive use of nitrogen. I don't need to tell that to people who are in Europe, nitrification. But also the idea that you get a lock-in in terms of you cannot get phosphorus released from the soil because the microorganisms, you've already killed them. So you get what you call a fixation of phosphorus and other micronutrients, so they are not available to crops anymore. So even though we think that we are putting these kind of nutrients into the soil, it's a short-term fix with, as you rightly put, long-term consequences on soil health. And so you see those two, kind of the way we grow our crops, the way it has a huge impact on the soil health and the biodiversity in the soil. And this other slide, looking at the farming systems, again, I gave the example of Niger, but this is the typical that we see if you have an industrial model or a monocropping model. What does that mean for biodiversity? It means what you're putting for that model to be as efficient as we are told it is efficient in terms of increasing yields or in terms of economic returns. But what you're seeing is actually we don't do the true cost of accounting. We are not counting the negative externalities, the use of pesticides, the promotion of expensive seeds that are not available and not controlled by local communities. And so, on the other hand, when you have a diversified production system, you're getting a lot of biodiversity into it, basically from the crops that you're growing, but from the interactions between crops, trees, and livestock. And so what I'm trying to say here, the evidence is becoming more clear and better. This is a recent paper that was produced in Nature that was showing that agriculture and climate change are reshaping agrobiodiversity, insect biodiversity worldwide. But what you're seeing on this side is the tropical dimension and then the temperate countries on that other side. And so when you look at the tropical side, is you see a decline in terms of insect and abundance, as well as insect species on the second slide. And the figures are 50% lower insect abundance and 20% fewer insect species, and especially in the tropical countries. You have a little bit of positive reactions on the temperate countries, but still overall you have negative effect on insects. And the last one here comes from work that we've done with our partners as WRI, and especially in Africa, looking at, again, what is happening in terms of productivity in Africa. And what this graph is showing is that we are increasing having habitat loss and fragmentation, and particularly that the increase, whatever increase we are seeing in terms of productivity is largely led by farmers encroaching into new natural habitats, and especially forests, wetlands, and peatlands. And so what we are learning is that there's need to invest more in sustainable production methods, regenerative agroecological methods, if we want to save biodiversity, because otherwise you get, when soil health gets exhausted in particular places, farmers shift to the new areas, new farming areas, and that then means we are reducing both the habitat for biodiversity as well as the biodiversity in itself. So thank you very much. That's what I'd like to share today.